so Freya Project Talks is a series that we have developed to replace our in-person events during this pandemic. So the Freya Project is featuring conversations between members of our community and people doing essential work that you should know a little bit more about. So that is why I, Jess McIntosh, have brought her, Jess Rocketto, to this particular conversation because I am a member of the Freya community and other Jess is doing work that you all need to know about. So she's the executive director of Care in Action, but has been organizing on so many fronts for so many years. It's almost impossible in 20 minutes to give a resume. So just trust that this is a woman who knows what she's talking about, especially when it comes to elections. And that is Mr. President, her cat, also joining us.
He always wants to join for special events.
So we will provide with more links and more ways to find out about the work that Jess is doing after the conversation. But I guess I just got to start with this like pandemic world that we're in. We're having an election and a pandemic at the same time. It's never been done before. Nobody gets out the vote in a pandemic. So how, as someone who thinks in 4-year increments about how to do this, how have you had to readjust your work?
I mean, it's honestly kind of hard to convey like the amount of change that has happened. Almost everything we know about what's effective in elections, has very little bearing on the pandemic. And I'm sorry, this is his afternoon tea
Honestly,
time.
This is the only thing that I want to keep about pandemic life and post-pandemic is like pets Zoom bombing, like pets in meetings. It's better.
It's the best. Yeah, but I mean, so like that's one is just what we know about what works in elections. Just there's no like controls for pandemic. That's not a thing. 2, I mean, at Care in Action, I had been going around the country, raising money, telling people about how we were going to do this massive door knocking program. We were going to talk to women who don't usually vote in elections. We were going to tell them what to do by going and knocking on their door a bunch of times. And then it became very difficult to do that. So we actually had to completely change our entire program. People that we had hired, give them completely new training, get new technology, we had to add money to our budget, like just a huge total change. And then I think that and we were lucky because domestic workers were experiencing the pain of the pandemic before many other people. We were actually probably a month ahead of most organizations in doing that. We made our switch in March. I would say most people are probably making their switch like in April or May. Yeah. And even then I was like, oh my God, we have to change, there's so many phones are less effective than doors. So we have to like triple the amount of contact that we give people to try to make the same amount of contact with them, which we think is essential at turning them out. Like just a lot more work at a time when the stakes got even higher. And it was like, it's kind of crazy to think of pre-pandemic that the stakes were high, but they were. Like it was already a really important election. Then the pandemic happens and it's like, sorry, no, the stakes are high. Then the Supreme Court happens and it's like, no, sorry, did you know the stakes are high in this election? The stakes are high. So then Trump gets COVID and it's like, by the way, stakes very high. So like, I think that is another thing. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of times in election cycles where you think something is going to make a difference. Like, Jess, I feel like this happened to us both so many times. It's like, you think that thing is going to really like change the race. It's going to really like have an effect. It does nothing. It does like negative.
Access Hollywood tape, which we both worked on Hillary's race together. We were in the space for that. And it was whenever anybody asked me about an October surprise, I'm like, we got the mother of all October surprises. You know what it did? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah. And I feel like, but then this is one of those situations where the stakes were very high and things are happening that are having an effect that are like, just, it means that you have to be so flexible. And already in campaign life, you have to be flexible. It requires such flexibility. And I do think like for all of us, I think for voters too, like there's a point at which you bend and you kind of break. And it's like, the hope is that the break doesn't happen until after we voted already, right? Like after, like, and I think that's something that I really am trying to address in our program and think a lot about, because at some point people just don't have anything else to give. Like they just don't. And so that if that's natural, then you have to build a program that understands that about people and like really understands how they work, which is just one thing I wish people knew more about electoral programs. Like at the core of this is like us trying to understand like what motivates people, like what makes them tick, like how do they behave, and like how can we shape that and try to like send that, hopefully towards their better angels.
So I want to talk about the electorate this year, because I think so nothing changed with the Access Hollywood tape in 2016. We can talk about all of the many reasons, misogyny, why that happened, but mostly what we were dealing with was a pretty limited electorate. We were dealing with likely voters. Every candidate tries to bring out their voters, but we hit about 50%, 53%, which was a little short of our high water mark of 55%. This year actually does feel different. Like there's Travis County, Texas just put out their voting numbers, their early registration, and 97% of the county is registered. Florida could hit 67%. We have seen 6 million young people who never vote in these numbers have already, as of this taping, which is still weeks away from the election, they've already voted. So every year we talk about expanding the base and we talk about expanding the electorate. It feels like this year it's actually happening. So talk a little bit about what that means to reach people who have not been considered part of the process. I think most people don't even realize that polls are just of people who have voted before, which if you're 18 or a newly naturalized citizen, you can't be counted as a likely voter, even if you're 100% guaranteed to vote. So talk about that this year, this context. Like, am I just being overly optimistic about things?
Actually, I don't think you are. And I think sometimes people do get overly optimistic. It's like there's a cavalry that's going to like come in, and
the youth.
There's no cavalry. It's not going to happen. So that's like what I often find in discussions like this is what people are hoping is that somebody else will do it and then like it will be fine, right? Which I think is like a little bit about the fear that we have, particularly in elections like this. It's like someone else will take care of this, and that like as long as I can just keep saying that, and like maybe there's even some polls that like tell me that that's going to be the case, it's like it's going to be okay. And it's like, well, you have a lot of agency in this process. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, my vote doesn't matter, or especially even like at the presidential level, right? It's like so many people are voting, but like actually the number one thing I've been telling people is most people don't vote. Like actually most people do not vote. That's why you hear about it so much, because like over half of the people who are eligible to vote just do not. Half the country just right away. That's like not registered. That is like people who have all the ability that they need to vote and just decide not to. So the fact that now we're seeing, as you're noting, Jess, that like, 86%, 96% of people on the very first day of early vote, which is like historically so hard to get people to turn out for, like before election day, is a really big shift. I mean, a really, really big shift. And part of that is, I think, what's happened over the last 4 years. I say we're in an organizing renaissance. Like this is when people look back and they're like the civil rights movement in the 1960s, like they're going to say that about us. They're going to be like the racial justice movement, like the resistance, whatever they're going to call it. And the 2020s, like that's going to be a thing that they like talk about, which, as you're going through that stuff, you don't totally realize it, but we could be looking at the election that becomes the moment that transforms our country forever, because millions of people who have never voted before are going to take action in this election by voting. And that is like, oh my God, holy shit, yay, like, that's awesome. So the fact that we're seeing kind of early signs of that is really, really good. The other thing about, people who are what sometimes folks call like low propensity voters, which I call high potential voters, is
that's great.
Yes.
Yeah,
high potential. We have agency. We have agency.
Language matters.
Language matters a lot. Yes, I call them high potential voters. And one of the reasons I do that is, so at Karen Action, we are focused entirely on engaging high potential women of color voters. When those women vote, They vote their values. They vote for a woman's right to choose. They vote for racial justice. They vote for good education. They vote for, good immigration policies, like all the stuff that will actually advance our country. They vote for that. If that is true, if they share our values and there is like things on the ballot that in theory like affect them and that they would care about, you have to ask yourself like, well, why aren't they voting? And the answer is really simple. Nobody's talking to them. Nobody invests in them. Nobody is trying to get them to turn out to vote. So that is like completely mind-blowing to me. Like that just doesn't make sense. And we did this research a couple of years ago after the 2016 election to try to understand like, well, what, like, it's like, in some ways it's like that, it can't be that simple.
Right.
It must be, and one of the things that we looked into was in the state of Wisconsin. So in Wisconsin in 2016, Donald Trump won that state by 22,000 votes, like about 22,000 votes. Unregistered women of color who were eligible to vote but were not registered was about 48,000 people. And then registered women of color who did not vote was 107,000 women.
Oh my God.
So if we had just tried to register even half of the women who were not registered, or if we had literally just tried to talk to women who were registered to vote and told them why the election mattered, we could have won. We could have won the election. We could have won Wisconsin. We could have won the election. So that was like, having that data on that research was totally transformative for me, because I was like, okay, hold on. Are you just telling me people are racist and sexist and they don't want to just go knock on the doors of women of color? That really, and like that's actually the answer. That is literally the answer. Like their votes are seen as less desirable. Their votes are seen as like, we hear this all the time. You can't go knock on those doors. It's too hard, or like those voters never turn out. It's like, it was wild once we started like peeling back the layers there. So you know what we decided to do? We just decided to go talk to them. Yeah. We decided to go talk to as many of those women as possible. And it turns out when you go talk to them, they have normal questions that voters have, like, oh, well, I didn't know that. Can you tell me more about the rules? Or what do I need to bring? Or like, or this is truly a thing that's happened to me many times now at this point. People will call us and be like, I was waiting for someone to call. I've just been waiting.
Wow. Okay. So you tweeted a thing a couple weeks ago that has literally been rattling around in my head. I love a good statistic. Like I love a good like mind flip statistic. And this was one of them. And I think it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, the kinds of voters that we prioritize. Because it goes back, it goes back to the Freya Project, but it's about the kinds of stories that we tell. It's about the stories that we center. So you tweeted that there were 9 times more housekeepers in America than coal miners. Mm-hmm. And I want to put that in the context of every political speech, ad, article, movie, you name it, mm-hmm. about the coal miners whose votes we need to get back because their industry has been decimated. And I can tell you more about the politics of a coal miner without ever having met one in my entire life than I could about, I can't tell you not as much about the demographics of housekeepers. I certainly can't tell you about like how many of them have status to vote, how many are registered. I don't know what political parties are saying to them. I don't know how to pander to them. I've never seen an ad aimed at them. I've never seen a New York Times, this is how domestic workers are voting, A1 front page story. And there are 9 times more.
And just, here's the other thing, is that care work, so that's elder care workers, housekeepers, and nannies, and especially like elder and home care workers, is about to become one of the largest sectors of the economy in the next like 6 or 7 years. By 2030, the domestic work sector is going to like explode. So not only are they already so much bigger than the coal miners, they're about to be like a major part of the economy, massive, huge part of the economy.
So if we ignore a massive economic sector because it's run by people that we're not valuing, that seems to, I don't know, be a bit hamstringy for a country that's trying to get out of recession.
Big problem. I mean, part of it is that this is something I tell everybody, like what the jobs of the future are, it really matters a lot. And right now, the jobs of the future are poverty wage jobs, high risk poverty wage jobs. So we have an opportunity that we've actually seen this ahead of time, and we can make changes to, like, domestic workers are still not entitled to labor rights in this country. Literally, they are excluded from the labor rights law, which means that, like, stuff like bathroom breaks, water breaks, paid time off, like freedom from harassment. We're still trying to pass laws to make it so you cannot sexually harass domestic workers on the job. That is like a thing we're still trying to pass. So this is ground zero for like making it happen. And that matters because this is going to shape our whole economy, and which is going to shape our lives. One of the things that I have been so transformed by in this process of like talking to domestic workers, talking to women of color, is that they're really clear in their politics, like 100% clear. They're really clear on who's supporting them and who's not. And they're like deeply informed. These are high information voters. And that lack of investment is about our ambivalence about women having a big role and a big say, about Black women having a big role and a big say, and increasingly about Latinx women having a big role and a big say, about the way that the legacy of domestic work literally goes back to slavery. And so like we are in this shift of power, wrestling with the origins and the vestiges of slavery that still exist in our society. And it's like, okay, all that's tough. That's really tough. You're right. That's like a lot to work through. And we have in front of us a clear path with people who could not be more clear about where they want us to go and what they need. So like, get on board. just get on board. And then when we hear about the stories of those women, like, it's amazing. I talk a lot about Dorothy Bolton. She's one of the founders of the domestic worker movement in this country. And the story goes that she was in Atlanta, Georgia. One of her neighbors was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he was giving a speech, and she went up to him and she was like, no, I really think you need to organize domestic workers, like, and told him about the plight. And she ends that, and he's like, sounds like you're going to do a great job organizing domestic workers. And then she went off and did it. She was like, okay. And the domestic worker union, you had to have, and this is in the 1960s, this is Black women in the South in the 1960s, you had to pay your dues and have a voter registration card. That's how you could be a member of the union.
Wow.
And I want everyone to know Dorothy Bolton's name. I think Dorothy Bolton's name should be a household name. That's like the kind of story that I want us to tell.
Yeah.
And then there are like, I got like hundreds of those, honestly. Like every single one of these women are like, they're immigrants who come here and have cared for one family for 20 years and raised like multiple generations of that family. They are like women who have started their own businesses. They're women who have brought over their whole family on the wages from the domestic work, which, by the way, average $11,000 to $13,000 a year. So like that is a woman who should be our financial advisor, because it's not cheap to bring people over from your home country here and get them started. And
budget for a family on $11,000 a year, like put her in the Treasury Department. I'm not kidding.
Put her in the Treasury Department, like straight up put her in the Treasury Department. Yep. So it's just like, these are like the most incredible, amazing folks. And they have so much clarity about where they want things to go and what they want to do. And like, I want to follow those people. Like that just seems better than like super spreaders,
So yes. this is one of those, like, the good option is actually really quite good.
Yes!
And the bad option is even worse than the good option is good. So this is not a lesser of two evils situation. This is a good versus evil situation.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes.
So,
yes.
Okay. In the final couple minutes that we have, for people who are, I mean, I'm assuming everybody watching this has already made your plan to vote. Lots of you have already voted. Let's say you have friends who haven't. Like, what is your advice to people who are like, I don't know what to do in the last 20 days of this thing? Where is my time best spent?
I mean, one thing is, I will not assume that everybody has already made their plan to vote. Like, just straight up, I shan't. Because over half of us still do not vote. And so that means there are people on here who have not voted yet. And that's okay. Don't worry. No judgment. All you have to do is make sure that you know when you're voting, you know what time you're voting, and you know how to fill out your ballot. And actually, we try to talk about this in elections all the time. We always talk about how it's so easy, it's so easy, it's so easy. And what I'll say is it can be a little bit difficult this year to understand like how to fill out your ballot. Oftentimes you need to fill out the back. That's like really important.
Yeah,
So,
you
like,
got to sign one piece, but not another piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I want you to know that, like, take a little time to make sure that you're filling it out right, because you want your vote to count and that it gets in on time. And here's my hot tip for everybody, which is if you feel like you have a hard time like talking to people about this, I totally get it. It is very awkward. My mom is a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, super Catholic. We've had many an awkward conversation, a lot. And the way that I do this in my own family is I get a calendar invite, and I make the calendar invite, and I invite the people that I really want to make sure that they vote to the invite. And in the like notes, I put like, I'm voting at this time. I'm gonna add you. Maybe we could do it together. If not, tell me what time you're voting, and I will make a calendar invite for you. And you make it open. People add folks to the calendar invite. Like, that is one way for you just to have a little gentle convo with people and make sure, hey, just want to let you know what I'm doing. What are you doing? Let's talk about it.
Love that. I love
and they
that.
get a little reminder. And then they get a little, and you get a little reminder, which like I need a reminder.
Everybody needs a reminder. No, I think this is, okay, so this is the takeaway that I want to leave people with. Organize your own networks. Like, yes. you don't have to be a veteran organizer in order to be an organizer within your family and friend group. So thank you for the advice. And also thank you for working so goddamn hard to save all of us. We really appreciate that.
I'm doing my best. So I hope everyone does their part too by voting and asking their family and friends to vote.
Thank you so much for joining us for Freya Project Talks. We will obviously provide links and more info about Care in Action and all of the other amazing things that you do. We appreciate
Thank you so much,
Please
Jess.
stay safe.
Bye.